Hello everyone, welcome to the new session of monogenetic and polygenetic inheritance. So, in this session we are going to study about the monogenetic and polygenic inheritance. The main difference between the monogenic and polygenic inheritance is that in monogenic inheritance a single gene determines a single trait. Okay, so one gene determines one trait. So in case of monogenic inheritance, we are having one gene. Only one gene is responsible, and that for one trait or one character. Now, polygenic inheritance. What happens in polygenic inheritance? Polygenic inheritance, we are having more genes, number of genes that is responsible for one trait. So now you can understand how this monogenic and polygenic inheritance are different, right? So monogenic inheritance, only one gene is responsible for one trait, and here more than one genes is responsible for one single trait. Monogenic and polygenic inheritance are the two types of inheritance by which offspring get genetic information from their parent. So whether it is a monogenic or polygenic inheritance, these offsprings get their information from the parents only. So according to the Mendelian genetics, each gene has two alleles that determines the character for one particular trait. There are two alleles that determine one character, right? And these alleles segregate independently during the gamete formation, right? We have seen in the law of segregation that how the gametes are segregated in the F1 generation. So they produce a distinct character. Monogenic inheritance. So what is monogenic inheritance? Monogenic inheritance is the determination of a character by a single gene. This we have seen. So here two alleles of a single locus determine that trait. So at one particular locus, we are having two alleles. Right? Two alleles that determine one character. Okay, so two alleles of a single locus determines the trait. It is a form of Mendelian inheritance in which the independent segregation of allele allow the determination of a trait, right? So we have seen in the independent segregation of alleles how at the time of gamete formation the alleles get segregated, right? So during the gamete formation, each of the two alleles segregates into the separate gametes, and according to the first law of Mendelian inheritance, these gametes formation takes place, right? So that is the alleles segregation at the time of gamete formation. So according to the law of independent assortment, the second law of Mendelian inheritance, these allele assort independently to produce the F1 generation. So according to the law of independent assortment, the second law of Mendelian inheritance, alleles assort independently to produce F1 generation. Finally, according to the law of dominance, so what does the law of dominance say? One of the gene that is dominant to the allele of the same locus. Okay, so for this is the height. For height, we are having two alleles, the capital T and small t, right? So the capital T mask the activity of a small t. So we can say this capital T is the dominant one, dominant allele. The third law of Mendelian inheritance, dominant allele and recessive alleles co-work to determine the trait. So they co-work and determine one particular trait. So usually the sickle cell anemia and Huntington's disease and the cystic fibrosis, these are the monogenic trait. These are the diseases that show the monogenic traits. So we have seen that the monogenic inheritance is can be explained with the help of Mendelian inheritance, right? Because only one character is denoted by one single gene. Furthermore, there are two stages of alleles to express the monogenic trait. What are that? Some monogenic traits are autosomal dominant, such as Huntington disease, while other are autosomal recessive traits. So they express only when both the alleles for a gene are recessive. So that is called as autosomal recessive. And if any of is a dominant allele for a gene, then that will be called as autosomal dominant one. So the dominant trait, the trait is expressed in the presence of a dominant allele, right? So one of the alleles should be a dominant, while the recessive trait, the trait is expressed when both the alleles are recessive. If it is a one dominant, then that particular allele cannot express, the recessive that cannot express itself. If recessive has to express, then both the allele has to be recessive, right? So for instance, sickle cell anemia and the cystic fibrosis are the recessive traits. So these are the two that shows the recessive traits by monogenic inheritance. Only single gene is responsible for this particular trait. Now comes the polygenic inheritance. Very, very important. So polygenic inheritance is the determination of a single character by two or more genes. So number of genes, these are the genes that is responsible for single character, right? So here the contributing genes shows the incomplete dominance. Okay, incomplete dominance. While being the mixture of the parental traits, environmental factors also affect the polygenic inheritance. So environmental factor also play a very important role for the effect of the polygenic inheritance, right? On the other hand, the polygenic traits are always quantitative. So that is, it can be quantified. So that is called as quantitative. We will see how we can say that this particular trait is quantitative. So in addition, polygenic traits exhibit the continuous distribution in a population. Thus, the distribution of curve of the polygenic inheritance is a bell-shaped. So in this form, we are having a polygenic inheritance curve like this. Okay, we will see with one of the example. Usually the great variability of a gene occurs within a population in a polygenic traits. The organisms at the middle of the distribution curve consist of a combination of both dominant and recessive alleles. So polygenic inheritance, the very best example is the human skin color. Okay, and in the human skin color we have a bell-shaped curve, right? Individual with many of the dominant alleles or the recessive alleles may appear at the end of the curve. So dominant alleles are present at the end of the curve. So here we are having a curve. So at the end of the curve, this part shows the dominant or recessive allele. Dominant or recessive allele. Right? So the color of the human eye is controlled by 16 different genes. One of the examples, 16 different genes control the human eye color. So the eye color is determined by the amount of melanin produced in the front of the iris. So here we can see that the human eye is one of the examples showing the polygenic inheritance, and the melanin pigment present in front of the iris, produced in the front of the iris, determines the human eye color. Okay. The color can be black, brown, green, hazel, or sometimes blue even. The skin color of the human is another example of the polygenic inheritance, right? I have just now told that the color of the skin is determined by the amount of melanin produced in the skin. So for the eye color also and for the skin color also, the melanin pigment is responsible. Okay. So let us see how the skin color is determined. Okay, so the number of dark alleles present in the skin is high. The color of the skin becomes darker. So here we can see very light and very dark. So we can have a different types of, so we will have this a combination at the F1 generation, and when we have a cross with same type, that is capital A, capital B, small b, capital C, small c. So there are three different types of genes responsible for this. That is the capital A, B and C, right? So we are having the egg and sperm, right? And we can have so many combinations. So how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 types of gametes are produced. 8 different types of gametes are produced. And we can have so many combinations. So 8 into 8, total 64 types of combinations we can have, right? So we can see here 0 to 1. This is showing the quite recessive. And here we can see the dominant. That is the dark. And here the skin color, it is showing the light. Okay. So number of dark allele present in the skin is high. So that is the dominant, and the color of the skin becomes darker, right? So we can see the bell-shaped curve for the skin color. Okay. So this is one of the examples showing the polygenic inheritance. Monogenic and polygenic inheritance are the two types of inheritance that follow the Mendelian genetics. Genes determine trait of a particular character. A particular gene has two alleles that segregate independently during the gamete formation to produce a distinct character. So, genes determine the trait of a particular character. There are different genes that determine the trait of a particular character. It has two alleles that segregate independently during the gamete formation to produce the distinct character. So we have seen that. Monogenic inheritance refers to the inheritance that is controlled by the allele for one particular locus. While if we compare it with the polygenic inheritance, then it refers to the kind of inheritance in which the trait is produced by the cumulative effects of many genes. So here cumulative effect, that is the quantitative number of genes, number of combinations we are having. For the skin color, we are having 64 different types of combinations, showing the quantitative type of inheritance. Okay, as a showing its cumulative effects. Many genes effects accumulate, and that gives a one particular character. So in the monogenic inheritance, one particular locus, okay, controlled by one particular allele, and here in the case of polygenic, many genes are involved having different alleles. Number of genes. So usually in monogenic inheritance, single gene determines, whereas in the case of polygenic inheritance, two or more genes determine a particular character. So first difference. Second difference, type of character. Monogenic inheritance determine the qualitative character, while the polygenic inheritance, just opposite, is determined the quantitative character. Just now we have seen in the case of skin color. Monogenic inheritance is a type of Mendelian inheritance, while the polygenic inheritance is a non-Mendelian inheritance. This also we have discussed. The monogenic inheritance is a type of Mendelian inheritance that it follows the law of segregation as well as the dominant, whereas the polygenic inheritance do not follow the Mendelian inheritance because it is controlled by number of genes and it is controlled one single character, right? So some of the characters of the monogenic inheritance include single cell anemia, Huntington's disease, and the cystic fibrosis, while some of the example of polygenic inheritance are skin pigmentation, height, and the eye color. Okay. The brief monogenic inheritance is the determination of a particular character by a single gene, while the polygenic inheritance is the determination of a particular character by two or more genes. Right? This is the conclusion. And in addition, monogenic inheritance determine the qualitative character, while the polygenic inheritance determine the quantitative character. Okay. So these are some of the examples. Again, monogenic examples are Huntington disease, cystic fibrosis, while the example of polygenic inheritance are the skin pigmentation and the eye color. Okay, so the main difference between the monogenic and the polygenic inheritance is the number of genes that determines a particular character. So this is all about the monogenic and polygenic inheritance. We will meet with one more interesting session. Till then, thank you very much.